We remember well 1,000 days ago as Russia launched what it called a special military operation. The fall of Kyiv seemed inevitable, but that has not happened. The cost has been very high. Hundreds of thousands of military and civilians have been killed in this war. Millions of Ukrainians have been uprooted from their homes. We have more now on the toll that the war has taken and, when it's over, what it will cost to rebuild.
1 million casualties. That's the total of dead and wounded since Russia invaded Ukraine 1,000 days ago, according to various Western sources. Most of the dead and wounded are soldiers, but a significant number are civilians. Of the military casualties, U.S. officials say about 300,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed or wounded since the conflict began. They estimate more than 600,000 Russian casualties in the same time. As for civilians, at the end of July, the United Nations said that over 11,000 Ukrainian civilians had died and nearly 24,000 were wounded, and cautioned that those official counts were likely lower than the real totals. In terms of military equipment, Russia has lost thousands of tanks. Estimates start at 3,000, while ramping up production to replace those losses. Ukraine has burned through billions of dollars of tanks and armored vehicles supplied by the West, but there are no hard figures available. When it comes to infrastructure, the International Energy Agency said earlier this year that Ukraine can only generate 1/3 of the electricity it did before the war, and it's lost hundreds of thousands of buildings, including homes, sending more than 6 million refugees across its borders, with more than 3 million people still internally displaced. Estimates of the cost to rebuild all this vary. The most recent World Bank estimate said nearly $500 billion, a price tag that's gone up since then and continues to go up each day the war goes on.
Well, I'm joined now by Jade McGlynn, a specialist in Eastern Europe, which includes Russia's war in Ukraine, with King's College London. She joins us tonight from Kyiv in Eastern Ukraine. It's good to have you with us. So Tuesday marks officially 1,000 days since the full-scale invasion began. You're in Kyiv, a city that has been under constant attack. What would you say, what has this war done to Ukraine?
Actually, Kharkiv's under attack right now, I believe, since the air raid alarm just went off a few minutes ago. The changes have been enormous, and in some ways, I think it's only by looking at the really granular changes, the amount of families who no longer have a dad or a husband, or their dad or their husband has come back, not quite, the same man that went, the sheer destruction, the trauma, the horror, walking, down your local walking through your local shopping area and seeing that, half of the buildings are destroyed, for example, like here in Kharkiv. It takes an enormous emotional and psychological toll, I think, on society, and quite rightly, so much of our analysis is focused on the military. But what I see out here is of course, a society that's really struggling, that's incredibly resilient. But this is nearly 3 years into this war.
What do you hear on the streets there in Kharkiv? Did they talk about victory in this war? And what would victory look like to most people? I mean, are we talking about regaining all of the territory, including Crimea?
I don't think this war has ever been, for either side, really about territory. I think that when Ukrainians say that they want the territory, all of the territory back, I mean, of course, that's their internationally, legally recognized right. But I think the best definition of victory that I've ever heard has come from General, now Ambassador Zaluzhny, which is we have to win to such an extent that the Russians, don't come back. And I think a lot of people, certainly out here in the East, for them, the more important thing is that part, is how do you genuinely achieve a real peace, not just, kicking the can down the road so that Russia can further rearm and start again later. And I think that's what people's fears are, is that if you give territory over, and ultimately it would have to be more than Donbass and Crimea, or the DNR and the LNR territories and Crimea, because he started the full-scale invasion after having de facto control over those territories. So it's not clear why giving him more territory would necessarily sate his imperial appetite.
Is there, though, an acceptance that a peaceful end to this war will have to include some territorial loss? I mean, do you hear people saying that that's a given in their opinion?
Yes, you'll hear lots of people in the East, I think, who bluntly do not especially, that's not what they're worried about. They just want there to be an end to constant bombing and the mass killings, but not to then see themselves occupied, because I think, as we know from the reports from the occupied territories, that isn't an end to the killing. It's just an end to Ukrainians being able to fight back against the killing.
Are they getting renewed hope by the decision that's come from the U.S. president giving the green light to Ukraine to use those U.S. ballistic missiles deeper inside Russia?
I'd say renewed hope would probably be a bit of an overstatement. I think there's a frustration that these permissions weren't provided sooner, when they could have actually changed things. You know, the really long drawn out process of providing the permissions, plus, you know, these huge announcements beforehand do somewhat undermine the deterrent effect. And of course, there are numerous restrictions, including that they need to be mainly focused on the areas, especially Kursk, where the North Korean soldiers are located. So again, it feels like this drip feeding, and I think although Ukrainians are happy, because right now it's very difficult on the front line, and every little helps, it does feel rather more like a little than a lot, sadly.
Jade, McGlynn, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and we admire you keeping your composure with air sirens sounding outside. You're in a war zone. Thank you. Well, I want to turn now to a security analyst inside Ukraine. Maria Avdeeva joins me from Kyiv in the far eastern part of the country, not far from the Russian border. Maria, it's good to see you again. I'm glad you were able to take the time to talk with us tonight. You know as well as I do that Donald Trump will most likely reverse Joe Biden's decision on allowing missiles to target inside Russia. Ukraine's military may have a window of just 2 months now. What impact can this truly have on the war?
Well, thanks for having me, as always, and thank you for following the war in Ukraine for all this 1,000 days. I do hope that Trump will not reverse the decision, and this will not be possible according to American legislation, but the decision is vital and crucial for Ukraine. The only thing which a little bit shadows the mood here is that this decision had to be taken long ago, and Ukraine was asking for this ban to be lifted for months, and now it keeps up the morale and it boosts morale, because under current circumstances, which are really grim, Russia is trying to get as much territory as they possibly can, attacking Ukraine every day with Shahid drones, with missiles, killing civilians daily. So under these circumstances, it gives Ukrainians hope that the situation will be changed. But on the other hand, everyone realizes that it's not changing the situation critically, because this permit is only for Kursk region as of now, and hopefully it will create a chain reaction with later Storm Shadows and Scalps missiles supplied by Britain and France, requested by Ukraine as well. But still, we are waiting for this decision to be made.
Maria, Russian lawmakers say that this is a major move towards a third world war, that this would bring Russia in direct conflict with NATO. Are you worried about escalation?
Well, this is what always was the Russian threat, escalation. And this is why Biden was explaining he is not given this permission because of the fear of escalation. But look, what happened is in August, Ukraine started an offensive operation in Kursk region of Russia, now controlling part of Russian territory for several months already. What was it if not crossing the red line? And what was the Russian response? In reality, Russia has already used every kind of weapon they have. They don't have any other capabilities except for nuclear weapons, and they don't use them because this is the only mean they have to continue threatening the West.
Well,
and
Maria,
this is why they're talking about escalation all the time. Yeah.
Let me play devil's advocate here. I mean, for example, the satellite information, the imagery that Ukraine's military uses with these ballistic missiles, with these ATACMS, I mean, all of that comes from NATO members. So doesn't Moscow have a point here when they say you're bringing Russia in direct confrontation with NATO?
Well, the thing is that Russia and President Putin himself always says that they are in direct confrontation with NATO. He always says that Ukraine has no legitimacy. It's a puppet state used by the US and other Western partners in the war with Russia. So from the day one, they state basically that they are in the war with all the Western community, with NATO, and seeing the US as their primarily adversary.
Okay.
So this is all talking without any real background. And actually, this talking has no point to threaten those in the West who refrain from supporting Ukraine further and giving more help.
You and I spoke in the early days of this war, and I remember you walking along a street in Kyiv showing the resilience of the people. I remember you pointing to a Russian tank that was on the street, showing how the people refused to let the war upend their lives completely. I know that war fatigue has set in for a lot of people. What does an acceptable end to this war look like to you now?
Well, I'm still, shocked that we are here in the 1,000 days since the war started. Because all the world has all the power to stop it before, not to allow Russia. But what we have is just dragging the war for all these days and long months. But anyway, in any case, every family in Ukraine has already lost so much. Like in your report, it says that millions were forced to flee their homes. Thousands, hundreds of thousands lost their family members and loved ones, and everyone sacrificed so much for this war. And actually, this is Russia is trying to completely crush Ukraine. They just don't want the territory. They want our country not to exist. And this is the fight for our survival. And for me, and I think for many other people in Ukraine, this is just a matter of survival, and this is what we are fighting for. So we will not stop until we win in this war. And I think that even for some, this might be sounding too optimistic or too unreal, but this is what the feeling is inside here in Ukraine. We fight for our freedom, and if you do that, it's just you want to win. There is nothing you want to sacrifice for this. And all this talks about peace deal and talking with Putin, what he is doing with Ukraine every day. Today, Odessa, where a lot of my friends are living, is covered with blood of the people who were killed on the streets because of Russian missile attack. And this is a daily life of Ukrainians. And this is why we want to win in this war. And this is why we are fighting, and we continue to do so. Ukrainian
security expert Maria Avdeeva joining us tonight from Kyiv. And Maria, we understand that there were air sirens sounding tonight. We want to remind our viewers you are talking to us from an active war zone. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
We're joined now by Olga Tokariuk. She's an Academy Associate at Chatham House, which is a British think tank based in London. Welcome to DW, Olga. It's been 1,000 days since Russia's full-scale invasion. Can you tell us how this ongoing war has impacted Ukrainian society?
Hello, and thank you for having me. Well, obviously, the impact has been tremendous. The number of casualties is huge, both in the military and among civilians. And every Ukrainian family has lost someone in this war. So many people have been displaced, either inside or outside of the country. So many of these things are already listed in your report before. But what, is also remarkable is how Ukrainians were able to mobilize and resist and still fight 1,000 days later. in a war that many predicted will be over in just 3 days with the victory of Russia. And you know what I think is also remarkable is that why is this happening is because many Ukrainians, or the majority of Ukrainians, see this war as an existential war for the survival of Ukraine as a free and independent state and as a democracy. I think many were also shocked by the real attitude of Russia to Ukraine, because Russian officials have been repeatedly saying that Ukrainians do not exist, that Ukrainian identity is something that has been artificially created. And I think that's why, Ukrainians are so mobilized. That's why they are resisting. That's why they are fighting for their freedom, because they feel like it's not only the war for their life, but also for the lives of the next generations of Ukrainians.
Mm-hmm. Olga, you've made very clear how many Ukrainians have suffered losses, have lost a loved one, have lost friends. Can you tell us how Ukrainians are able or are managing to cope with these immense losses?
Well, the war also brought an incredible unity of Ukrainians and immense solidarity of, people who are just helping other people, organizing themselves, and just not waiting for the government to solve everything, but actually to stepping in and, just volunteering. So many people keep donating to the Ukrainian armed forces or to the volunteers, the medical workers that treat Ukrainian soldiers who take them out wounded from the front line. So people still keep donating. They keep sending whatever the soldiers need. They keep themselves participating in the war effort in various ways, because, as I said, the toll is huge, but it could be even higher if Russia is not stopped, if Ukraine is not able to win this war, if there is some sort of peace deal which is unfavorable for Ukraine, which could just delay the war and would just lead to another Russian aggression in a couple of years' time.
Mm-hmm. On a more practical level, Ukraine's energy infrastructure has been severely damaged. Can you tell us how that is impacting people's daily lives?
There have been rolling blackouts caused by Russia's deliberate attacks on Ukraine's civilian and energy infrastructure, basically since the beginning of the war. And people, 2 years or almost 3 years, 1,000 days into the invasion, they found ways to cope with that. So they bought generators, they secured some alternative provisions of energy supply, like some people that I know installed solar panels, for example, not to be reliant on a centralized electricity provision. So people find their ways to cope. But I think what is also significant here is that in every strike on energy infrastructure, Russia not only destroys energy infrastructure, it also kills people, it kills civilians. And that's why, Ukraine has been making this point for a very long time, that Ukraine needs the ability to defend its infrastructure, its energy grid, but also its civilians from Russian drone and missile attacks that have also intensified in recent days.
And of course, the US says it will now allow Ukraine to use the ATACMS missiles to strike inside Russia. How will this change Ukraine's defense strategy?
This is a very important decision, although we do not know whether Ukraine will be able to use these ATACMS missiles on territory of Russia other than Kursk region, which apparently seems to be the case for now. So Ukraine wanted and for a long time argued for these restrictions on the use of these missiles to be lifted, because it made this case that it doesn't really make sense to only down Russian missiles and drones when they are already in Ukrainian sky. It would make more sense to strike and destroy Russian military launching sites on the Russian territory before these missiles and drones are sent into Ukraine. So hopefully with the help of these missiles, Ukraine will be able to destroy these military sites. And I want to stress that these are military sites on the Russian territory, that it will be able to protect its infrastructure and its civilian lives. Well, this decision also comes at a time when Russia just involved around 11,000 North Korean troops in its war effort against Ukraine. So this is a response to that greater internationalization of the conflict. And this also comes at a time when we are expecting a change of the US administration with the new President Trump coming to power in January. And it will hopefully strengthen Ukraine's negotiating position in some sort of peace talks with Russia that seem to be inevitable and that might not necessarily be in Ukraine's favor.
Olga Tokariuk from the Chatham House think tank in London. Olga, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.